Good afternoon and welcome to the WAVY Digital Desk. I'm your host, Sarah Good. Today we're going to be speaking about back to school health. I know we don't really want that countdown to start, but in just about a month, people are going to head back to the classrooms here in the Hampton Roads area. Some even less as they head back to sports or to earlier start dates. We're going to talk about what you need to know heading back into school, from maybe talking about those forms I know that everybody gets at this time of year, to what you need to watch out for, and maybe how to help your child with routines from sleep to after school activities. So Dr. Rowland from CHKD is going to speak with us, and I'm going to bring her on now. Dr. Rowland, thank you so much for coming back to the digital desk.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sarah.
Absolutely. It's that time of year again, and I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions, both in your role, with the health committee and also as a pediatrician. Can you just tell us what are some of those top things you've already been hearing from parents or that you've already been telling parents, going into this 2024-2025 school year?
Well, when a parent comes to the office, usually they have a couple of things on their mind. So I would say, every visit is tailored a little bit differently. So I like to address what parents are thinking about. And it's the middle of the summer, so the kids don't, many of them don't want to think about going back to school, but they're coming in with their forms, thinking about sports, back to school. Some of the parents are in the middle of the summer seeing their kids with sleep schedules that are all off, all over the place. And so they're thinking about, what do I need to do when I get my child back to school, getting on a regular routine. So really, it's up to you where you want me to start, because there's a whole lot of things with getting back to school.
Absolutely. I think, the first thing I want to speak to is, let's talk about the big thing that you just brought up, sleep schedule. So kids are going straight into the school year. There's also, I feel like, always updated studies on sleep and what kids need, and also tools to help people sleep that aren't okay for kids. So if you could start by talking about sleep, I think that's a great place to start.
Absolutely. I would say you need to look at the age group and also the individual child. So for our kids some of our kids with developmental difficulties will have a different sleep schedule, but just talking about kids in the elementary age, for instance, usually they're not the ones that are up till 1 in the morning. That's our teenagers. Their sleep schedule migrates later and later and later, sometimes during the summertime. So if we look at elementary, I think the key is trying to get them in a routine closer to bedtime that's predictable, if at all possible, to try to settle down before bed. And the one big key, and this is for all age groups, is to try to discontinue electronic devices 90 minutes before bed. That's a tall order right now with all the cell phone use and the screens. But if you can get all of the screen exposure down to zero, at least an hour before bed, that is going to help just our brains make melatonin and go to sleep better. So teenagers can do it the easy way or the hard way. So sometimes they want to enjoy every last bit of that summer. And so that first week of school is going to be a bit exhausting. So if that's your kid, I would just encourage them to try to not take naps after school, because then they'll get into that cycle of napping after school, not getting tired until 11 or 12, getting up early, being exhausted, coming home and napping. So they're going to have it try to be a 20-minute power nap. That's what I would say about the teenagers. And I try to talk to them in my office about how our circadian rhythm works and kind of get them on board. And the middle schoolers, I think you can kind of walk a line between the two, where you try to teach them why sleep is important, let them notice when they stay up too late. There's a big difference between a sixth grader and an eighth grader. So I would just talk to them about the importance of sleep, and don't be afraid to get those screens taken away.
And I was going to
And
say, and oh, sorry, just to jump in, with those phones, and we'll get to some of those details in a second about social media and sort of, managing that. But the screen time, it's not even just that it keeps your brain awake, right? It's the lights that we're worried about too.
yes, so the light coming from the screen really shuts off your brain's ability to make melatonin. And I teach the kids in the clinic that, this is your sleepy chemical that you naturally get when it gets dark outside. This is what helps you know that it's time to go to sleep. And so that's why it's so easy to stay up very late on devices, because your body's not getting that signal that it's time for sleep. And speaking of melatonin, I would say there's really not great safety data on giving this to your child. So in any case, there are some children that might qualify for this. Talk to your pediatrician. That's why we have these well visits. But I would caution against just giving that over the counter without talking to your physician first.
And if a child's having difficulty falling asleep, could there also be underlying causes for that, just as opposed to say, hey, my kid's a bad sleeper? Could there actually be maybe other health issues or other issues, maybe mental?
Absolutely. I would say one a common culprit that sometimes we don't think about besides screen is late night exercise. So we have all of these sports and activities that the kids are participating in, and sometimes these practices are not done until 8 p.m. And then the kids' bedtime is supposed to be 9 p.m. Well, their adrenaline is going, they're excited from having just exercised. It's not going to be easy for them to settle down. So I would caution families about after school activities, making sure there's enough time for them to settle down before bedtime. And then, as you pointed out and hinted at, that mental health concerns can sometimes often present with sleep difficulties. We all know what it's like to be worried as adults. It's hard to sleep. And kids have the same thing, but they don't necessarily have the words and ability to talk about it. So, asking the child just what's going, what are you thinking about? And just being there for them when they're falling asleep, asking them if they have worries or things, and then taking next steps to help address those can help with sleep as well.
And, moving into the next thing I think is a good segue is that social media element. Going back to school, this has been a conversation I know for years, but increasingly, we've heard calls to have warning labels on social media. Right now in Virginia, at least, they're trying to work on what cell phone free education could possibly look like in 2025. How do you direct parents on how to help their kids manage social media usage and, social media in general?
So I start talking about it young because it's incredible to me how many elementary school children have phones and how much is unregulated. So I try to catch them early and say, you're not being a bad parent by postponing the use of social media. The more of us parents who can stick together and say, you can have it, but let's wait until high school, let's wait until you're older, and even push it as far as you can. So there's some guidelines coming out about that, but I would say postpone the use of social media and then limit its use. So some of these kids are on, hours and hours and hours a day, and so that's very different than 1 hour a day of Instagram. Follow what your kid is looking at. Try to know what they're doing on their phone, especially the younger they are. But don't be afraid to just postpone the smartphones.
And we've heard about that across the spectrum. People not allowing their children to have accounts, people waiting until potentially they can have more of an awareness of what's out there. I know that it depends maybe on different age groups, but with kids getting phones younger and younger, how do you talk to them maybe even about that phone safety and sort of bullying perhaps, or maybe some of that cyber bullying issues that can occur?
Yeah, it's a very difficult issue. I try to turn it into a health issue and less of like a privilege that parents give to their kids, to say it's like asking, it's putting your child in a car seat. It's having them wear a seatbelt. You're giving them a phone that is more secure. So I try to encourage them that if they do have a phone, to avoid the social media in those younger age groups. Let them text their friends, put screen time limits on it so they're not doing this all night, but know how to use the phone and know how to use the regulations that are available already on the phones, because sometimes parents aren't sure where to find some of these. And the AAP actually has some great resources, healthychildren.org, and there's a media plan, a family media plan, where you can actually, when the child gets the phone, sit down and make a plan together about how it's going to be used, how it will be monitored, and keep in touch. And so it can be purposeful rather than just here's your phone, and when the child is quiet and busy, not really thinking more about it.
Right, and to give kids some of that power of why maybe these rules are in place, why the rules are what they are.
That's right. I think many kids are aware, at least in part, of some of the dangers, especially our teenagers, of of excessive media use. And I think teaching them that these companies do not have their best interest at heart at all. And it's up to parents and guardians to protect children from these companies until we have better regulations in this country on that.
And I see some questions in the chat just talking about the back to school forms in terms of, vaccinations. And that has been a topic over the last few years, especially since COVID, that people have had questions on just with the developments of the latest boosters and vaccines that have been available. And you have to go check with your individual cities, with your counties to find out what exactly is on the forms. But what have people been coming into you saying recently? I know that there's not in this area, but there have been COVID spikes this summer. What have you all been giving as maybe the recommendation or some of the baseline information to parents going into this year?
That's right. So we encourage being up to date on all your vaccinations. And the best way to do that is a yearly visit with your pediatrician to review what you've already had, review what's needed in the future. I don't have a lot of information on the fall COVID booster because it hasn't been released yet, but I do know that there will be one coming in the fall. And it's for 6 months and above. So we'll see. Be able to comment more on that after that is released. I will sometimes steer families with just questions to more areas to read, also, not just the CDC website or the AAP website. There's also some great folks out there, such as Dr. Paul Offit out of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So there's some excellent leaders out there with more information so parents know where to go.
Absolutely. And I can link some of those in our wavy.com article that will be in this chat so people can have a good resource to go. There's already some resources if you're going to that link on wavy.com from CHKD. I know that you all have a great family and parenting section on your website. So when we have these conversations, I always like to link back over there because you all do keep it up to date. Going into this year, there's also been questions about, I want to say too, have kids or are kids bouncing back from that COVID period where they were more shut down, maybe locked down in certain areas of the country. In Virginia and what you're seeing here, are you seeing kids bounce back maybe if they had any sort of social delays or any sort of behavioral things? What are you seeing now?
I always like to be optimistic, but it is disturbing sometimes because there has been so much learning loss, and I think we've all seen that data. There's also been a lot of some loss of social skills where we have some kids that aren't as ready for kindergarten as they would have been. However, I think we should just look at what the kids need now and move forward. So one thing that we were seeing is some delayed potty training, for instance. And so I would encourage families that have a child that is getting ready for preschool, the 4-year-old preschool, getting ready for kindergarten at 5. If they're having difficulties with potty training, go see their pediatrician, talk it over. Do this before school starts because schools really aren't set up for doing those types of things. And sometimes it's emotional regulation. And what I mean by that is that if kids feel big emotions just like we do, and so if you have a very angry 4-year-old or a very angry 16-year-old, they're going to have to know what to do with those feelings. And I think the pandemic was hard on kids with learning about emotional regulation, and schools are kind of seeing the effects of that, dealing with all of those big feelings. And so I think anything that we can do as parents, and again, all of us pediatricians are here for you as well, and our mental health team to try to help kids learn those skills that they may have not um, had the opportunity to learn because they weren't around as many other people during the pandemic.
And are there certain signs? Is it maybe if you're able? I know teachers have a lot of students in some of their classrooms, but paying attention to how they're doing in school, those sorts of reports from the in person teacher or teacher's hand that is communicating with the parents. Is it as simple as knowing at home if your kid is having some maybe discipline issues? I mean, what are some things that parents can look at?
I would say overall, does your things like, does your child like going to school? Is it overall a positive experience? Um, are they coming home? Are the moods? I mean, when you have kids at home, home is for, if the child is lucky, a home is a safe space. And so a lot of feelings are going to come out at home. So I don't want to worry parents just because the child could be well behaved all day and then come home and be a mess. And that can be normal. So I would say if it starts to interfere in activities where it's not just at home, but it's at school, and then they can't go to this other activity because they had a problem there. So sort of a pervasive problem where they're really just not able to do the things that the parent feels that they probably should be doing. That can be a warning sign. So sometimes anger is actually hiding something underneath, worry or hurt or something else. So I think just being there, being present for your child, and if you have a concern, again, come to your pediatrician and we can talk about it, because sometimes some things come out there that weren't obvious.
Right. And I've heard you say before, and I've heard other pediatricians say, you know your kid, so just try to be in tune and see how they're feeling, how they're doing, especially, new grades, new schools. How often really, I mean, children go through a lot of different growth spurts and, changes in personality as they figure out who they are, right? So just
That's
staying in
right.
tune.
And I think that it's important for us as parents to realize, as they go through everything that's new, it's new for us too. So my 16-year-old, or my 17-year-old, reminded me the other day. He said, "Mom, you are not a new parent." And I said, "Well, I've never been a parent to two teenage boys before. So like I'm constantly learning, and I think parents should remember that they're always going to be learning at every stage of the game too. So don't be shy about coming in and asking questions, and we'll brainstorm together. And not, if you're really concerned about your child and you don't think that they're doing well, then come in and talk to us."
And I want to talk about one more thing in terms of scheduling your kids, not to overschedule them. And we've heard sports get younger and younger. I saw, I think, recently on Sage KD's website, about sports and, not having kids get burnout and different things like that. But how do you feel about that overscheduling? I mean, just tell us what happens when you do tutoring, piano lessons, language lessons, all of this after school. Is that too, can that be too much?
You're absolutely right, and I'd say it absolutely can be too much. And I think parents are very well intentioned, and that we all want to give our child every opportunity. And there can be this sense of, if I don't get them in this and I don't get them in that, then that we might miss out on something. But kids need quiet time too. They need time to unwind from school, which is essentially a work day for them. They're they're there and they're working. They're learning all day long, even if they're not working on paper. They're watching the child over there who they think gave them a dirty look. I mean, it is work to be at school, and we forget about that. And so kids need some downtime with their family. They need some quiet time and free play, and they can learn a lot from that. So really trying to keep the activities reasonable, also so the family doesn't get exhausted. Because sometimes the kid's having a great time and mom and dad are driving all over the place, and it's too much.
Right. And just to go back to what you had said about, giving yourself grace as a parent, because it's always a new opportunity to be overscheduled as a family in general, to not have maybe that time to sit at the table or to all spend time together. Or as you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, the sleep schedule, all those things seem that they could just feed into each other.
Absolutely.
I want to just see if anyone else has any questions in the chat before we end. If not, I'm going to put a lot of the resources, Dr. Rowland, that you had mentioned in the article as well, so people can find out more information after this, if this sparks any sort of conversation. The last one I just wanted to mention as we sort of get into this school year is, mental health has been a big issue that we've spoken about. I know we mentioned it, with social media for a minute. But going into this school year, we've seen the CDC statistics about how kids are doing, whether that's the post-pandemic sort of residual effects, or it's just now in this technology age of ever sort of growing platforms and, usage. what are sort of your biggest pieces of advice for parents, maybe just in general, for watching their kids, maybe having those conversations when it's not just them being a teenager, but maybe some larger issues at home?
So that's a really difficult question because it depends on what the parent is concerned about. So if the parent is concerned about suicidality, for instance, or self-harm, that's an emergency. You need to get in and see someone right away. Um, so I would say, in general, just make talking about feelings an okay thing to do at home. Just be around so that you feel that your child can come to you if they have a concern about um, something serious, if they feel that if they're being bullied, that you're someone that they might be able to come to. And don't be afraid to just ask questions to try to get the conversation started. I think it's the trouble I see sometimes is when the child feels that I just can't talk to them about that. I can't bring that up. And then they withdraw and they stay in their room and they're on YouTube all day long and they're just not talking. But if you are in that situation where you have a child that won't talk to you, you can bring them into us because we can talk to the child one on one and sometimes get the conversation started. So I think just being present and showing that you unconditionally love them goes a long way.
And all this goes back to, having a pediatrician or having a primary care doctor that you can connect with. How important is that, not just to fill out the form to go back to school, but to be in touch as your kids are going through these stages?
Yes, we're on your side as parents, we're on your team, and we are here for you.
Well, Dr. Rowland, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Is there anything else, going to this school year? I know that we're just sort of scratching the surface. The larger conversations are going to be more specific to each kid. But is there anything else that you want to either caution parents or just remind parents going into this school year?
I would say just a reminder about how important healthy eating is to feeling well and having energy during the school. So we didn't talk much about that, but if I had to give a one-liner on that, it would be try to eat as much real food as possible, trying to steer away from the sugars and the ultra-processed food. If you just focus on eating food that doesn't have extra labels on it, that'll go a long way.
And I know it's easy to throw certain things in the lunchbox on occasion or on a busy day, but what that looks like for a kid in terms of how much food they're eating depending on their activity, that can really matter a lot into their everyday ability to just probably focus at school.
That's right. And it's difficult because 1 in 11 children in Virginia goes hungry. And so it's expensive to eat real food, but as much as you possibly can do that as a family, it definitely helps with our energy concentration and well-being.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
that accessibility too. I know there's a lot of health fairs coming up around the area. Please check on wavy.com if you're watching this, that have, access to health services, that have access to knowing more about food services in the area, more accessible and free mental health resources. So I know the cities in our area are doing things. So just be sure to head back to wavy.com to figure out ways that are good for your family. But Dr. Rowland, thank you so much again for being here this afternoon. I'm sure, as certain things come out closer to the school year, as we see different things about, the cell phone free education and such, there'll be more questions from parents, but we'll be sure to check back in with you all at CHKD on sort of how to proceed there.
Well, we appreciate you. Thanks, Sarah.
Absolutely. And if anyone's watching, please head over to wavy.com for more back to school resources. The guide's already out with start times, and you can figure out more, as we said, with your individual school and city on what you need for your back to school health forms. Be sure to check in with your pediatrician. But thank you again.